Alrighty, we're live. So, welcome back. I have to apologize about yesterday. The microphone was not turned on. So, I am the perfect example of memory being a false friend. So, I didn't have a checklist in place. The microphone was off, so I spent an hour that you couldn't hear. So, c'est la vie. Nobody died, but still, good lesson. So now I can see the microphone working and hopefully everything is okay. So yell out if you see any problems. So let's get started. We're basically going to repeat what happened yesterday that you might have seen but didn't hear. And we're going to just quickly go through the risk management framework for your boat, show you the risk lists we're building and the framework it's based upon. And then what we're actually going to do is we're going to work through an example. So this one here from the UK Marine Accident Investigation Branch, where sadly three private fishermen lost their lives in a near collision, but let's call it a near collision where their boat got swamped and they died. Okay. And the goal here is not to pass judgment on anyone. The goal is here that we can learn. When I'm on my boat and I'm the captain and you're on your boat, you're the captain, we are the responsible people for that in the eyes of the crew, in the eyes of the law. And the goal here is to inform ourselves as a group to be safer captains and have safer boats. So big field to go through, and this is why I'm doing it in series, and over time we'll build as the title of the live stream says, the world's best yacht risk management list. And that's going to take a little bit more than we're on 3 now. And I just noticed now for my checklist as well that YouTube's showing volume 2, so I need to look at that. Right. So let's get started. Now, this is what we built on the first 2 calls, was this spreadsheet. Now, the spreadsheet's limited because it is 2-dimensional, but once we get going and there's demand, I will integrate this into my software, Yacht Prep. Here, so for example, this is a readiness timeline which shows you when things are due and overdue. My boat is undergoing a refit and not fully up to date, as you can tell, but it's sitting in port and shouldn't sink. So we'll hopefully get there soon after some repairs and do a refresh. Right. So we'll integrate this eventually into the software and make it more usable for everyone. We'll have 2 versions. We'll have the public version, which people can sign in and use for research, and then we'll have the private version, which you can then customize for your own yacht and integrate into engineering systems, documents, crew, your voyages, etc., everything like that, which is what Yacht Prep aims to do. So to get into it, we have categories of hazards here. So a hazard is not necessarily a harm. A hazard is a potential source of harm. And we saw that once we went into the, apologies, open the thing. So again, just a bit of a caveat. We're starting where we're starting, and I come from a medical device background, which is where I learnt risk management, and medical devices are things that can make you better or they can kill you if they're not designed properly. So there's these things called international standards. The ISO organization, International Standards Organization, publishes them, and these contain, well, I say standard approaches to solving certain problems. One way to look at it. I think many people on here will either have worked with these in the past, either managed it or had to be trained in things like this. And this one here, it's medical device application of risk management. There are other standards we can use. This is a specialization of the general standard, and we will over time go back and look at the other standards. But if we go down to the definition, for example, And the definitions are really, really important. And it's surprising how often I've had professional conversations. Again, not to criticize, just how it is. And I've been on both sides of this, where the terms have not been defined well or mutually understood. And so one of the things we can really do here is define them. So here's the definition. Hazard is a potential source of harm. So fire is a hazard, right? It's a potential source of harm. It can be a benefit. If it's a gas cooker, it can cook your food. If your petrol canister catches on fire, it can be a source of harm to people or property, right? So we have hazard categories, and I'm just going to update that heading. Probably a nice build, hazard category, and then we have sub categories. As I said before, here we only have the ability to choose one per row, whereas in reality, this is probably more like a tag, or once we get in the database, we can actually associate, hazardous situation to multiple hazards or multiple harms, however it happens. I apologize here. I'm just going to turn off a filter I have turned on because it seems to be dropping in and out. And so again, I apologize. There we go. Got it. Okay. I apologize for this. I'm still setting it up. Okay. So that should be better. I'll stop going in and out of focus. I had a background blur on it, which is gone now. So yeah, so we got a hazard category, subcategory. So for example, fire, we've got fire prevention, and then fire extinguishing. I think that's a bad word. We'll fix that. flood prevention, flood treatment, management, etc. So stopping the water coming in, or if the water's already in there, getting it out, for example. And fire prevention, stopping the fire occurring, and then the fire management is managing the fire once it has been created. And then we go to the hazardous situation. Now, this is the core, this is the atomic level of risk management, which is you cannot have a general risk control for fire, right? You need to have a risk control for hazardous situations. And it specifies it in the ISO standard, and this is how risk management works. And this is the potential and the limitation of risk management, because you have to work through multiple hazardous situations to identify as many as you can. And we don't want to miss one, because the one you miss could be the one that gets you, right? That you don't have a mitigation for, it surprises you. And again, this is why we're sort of trying to do this crowdsourcing approach to get, get everybody's input and collaborate on it. So people have got a big pool of risks that they can go through and apply to their yacht. And together, we can do a better job than any one person can do. So the hazardous situation. So this is actually a sequence of events that leads to the potential harm. So again, it's not just something like, oh, I've got a fire on board. It's a very specific set of events with a very specific set of circumstances. Sorry, I'll turn that off. Sorry, let me just turn that off. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, so a sequence of events which leads to a potential harm, right? So this may seem like a silly example, and it's only silly because it sort of goes against common sense, which doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So you've got a spare petrol canister stored on the back deck underneath the coal barbecue, right? That's the beginning. And the event is the barbecue's lit, a coal drops onto the plastic canister and melts a hole in the container, and then petrol gas escapes and ignites from the heat of the barbecue, right? So that is the sequence of events which leads to the fire. Now, we analyze this stuff, even though it seems counterintuitive or not, because there are lessons in every hypothetical situation. So the unmitigated harm, and what that means is if there were no risk controls in place, the event is as we wrote it, then this is what can happen. We can get burns on people, we get property damage, smoke inhalation, etc., and all the health effects that go with that. And then we try to evaluate, we try to assess the risk, and we assess that on two axes. One is on the severity of the outcome, and then the other one is on the probability of the outcome. And then depending on that, we have a risk matrix, which is here, and we'll go through this in a second, where we determine in our risk plan, right? I'll call it a risk plan for now, where we build this matrix and determine what's acceptable risk or not. And we'll come back to that in a second, okay? And we say it's unacceptable, so that means we have to implement some risk controls to make sure that we reduce the risk to an acceptable standard. So here, the risk controls are actually reasonably simple, to be honest. And as I mentioned in another stream, I have a diesel engine, but I do have a petrol generator. I've got a 2-litre plastic canister. I think it was on board when I bought the boat, probably one of the cheapest ones you can buy. And just from doing this last night by myself, I've recognized a very good mitigation for my boat. So for example, the spare petrol is stored away from any ignition source. Okay, so I do that anyhow. The store petrol in a metal canister with explosion protection. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be a metal canister. It can just be it can be a metal or a plastic canister. The point here is with explosion protection. So I need to dive into this, but we looked at this on the stream the other day. Apparently there's some sort of mesh inside which can contain, as I understand it, the explosion. So that's good, and they're not that expensive. So if anybody's got petrol, spare petrol on their boat, just take a look and confirm that you have that. And then store a Class A extinguisher, so that's a water or foam fire extinguisher on the back deck near the barbecue, for example. And whether you got that petrol canister there or not, if you're having a barbecue, good practice to have the fire extinguisher nearby just in case, right? So if you look at those risk controls, I mean, especially the point is that to have a fire, you need ignition source, you need fuel, you need oxygen. We've removed the fuel away from the ignition source, so we've moved the petrol away from the barbecue, and no fire should ever occur, right? So here, and it depends, you can go into scenarios of control. So what if I just moved the petrol but left it in a canister without explosion protection, right? And without a fire extinguisher. That could be one scenario. I left it under the barbecue, but I had explosion protection and a fire extinguisher. So there are actually, different permutations of these risk controls. But I would say here I've probably been too pessimistic in the severity, because if the petrol's away, it's in an explosion-proof container, and you have the extinguisher, which you're never going to use because you don't have the fuel there, the severity there is not moderate. It's going to be a lot less, and the probability is going to be very, very low to impossible. And then in the risk matrix, then that becomes to acceptable. Okay, so these categories, the severity and the probability, we'll have a quick look. I'm doing it every stream just quickly, and it'll get faster and faster as we go along. But if you're watching and you've got a question, just please comment in the chat and I'm happy to address that. So here, category of harm, negligible, and I still need to finish this, but we've got two columns. We've got the human harm to human, and then we've got harm to property or the vessel. And actually, what we could do is also third party property, right? So, you hit somebody else's boat, you hit the dock, I don't know what, but you can damage somebody else's property as well. So it's, our boat, somebody else's stuff. And on the, the low end, negligible for human could be like mental stress, right? No real physical damage. Mental discomfort, for example. On the extreme end for human, death, permanent injury, as probably as severe as it gets. The vessel, minor damage, maybe a minor scratch in the gel coat in the paint, for example, a minor abrasion. On the extreme end, it's a total loss. The boat sunk and lost, or it's an insurance write-off. So, for example, it burns down to the waterline, and all you've got is a floating, smoldering mess that you'll get a check for, but the boat is lost, right? And then third-party property, very similar. So I still need to fill in these, what this means in between, because that's important to actually, when you go through the scenarios, try to estimate what sort of damage it could be. And if we do have live examples like we'll work through today, we can more and more understand the sort of harm that occurs in accidents. So these like minor case studies are really powerful to do. Then we got the probability of occurrence of harm, and there's two approaches to this: qualitative versus quantitative. So in a manufacturing environment, if you're producing like millions of widgets a year, you can track to a high level of accuracy, for example, defect rates, these sort of things. So we're not in that situation. So we're using a qualitative approach where we take an estimate in a band of what it could be. So rare to almost certain. And like theoretically, we've got 5 bands. So I guess you could argue that rare is 0 to 20%, unlikely 20 to 40%, etc. Where almost certain is 80 to 100%. That would be a reasonable approach to assigning a probability to it. So we've got a category, we've got the probability from very low, low, moderate, high, very high, and then the practical meaning. So rare could occur, but only in exceptional circumstances, freak circumstances, and expected to occur, and sorry, almost certain, very high probability, expected to occur frequently or repeatedly, right? And then we combine them in the matrices, and just let me zoom in on this quickly so we can see it better. So we combine them, and we'll do the two extremes because that's helpful: negligible and rare. So there's really minor harm or negligible harm, and it's very extraordinary circumstances. That's probably acceptable. You wouldn't even worry mitigating it, or that's what we want post mitigation. And then almost certain, so it's catastrophic. You're going to lose a boat. You're going to permanently disable someone, with an 80 to 100% probability. Well, that's clearly unacceptable. And then we make a choice somewhere between. We'll maybe dive into this deeper another point, but basically my cutoff is moderate and unlikely is acceptable, but anything above that in any direction is unacceptable. And again, I mentioned this yesterday, if you are a solo sailor and you're only responsible for yourself, and hopefully not going to put another boat or Coast Guard swimmer or Coast Guard crew in danger with a rescue, then I guess it's up to you to take that risk, right? But if you have crew on board, especially less experienced crew, so again, you could argue like a Whitbread round the world yacht, America's Cup yacht, is a different scenario. They may have a higher risk threshold than, for example, somebody taking out a couple of kids and friends who've never sailed before on a Sunday afternoon, right? So you as a captain must decide. It's not for me to decide or anyone else to decide, but just make sure you are doing acceptable risk for the mission you're undertaking and for the skill set of the people on board. That's a really important lesson. Right. So that's a very brief introduction to risk management. And we're going to start looking at this report here. So let me just zoom in again. Right, so we've got a collision. It's a collision between a commercial fishing vessel, Vertrauen, and they've called it a recreational motor cruiser. When you see the boat, you'll see that that's a very, maybe a generous name. I guess it's technically correct. I'm not going to do it, but you'll see the boat in a second. And it resulted in the sinking of James II, this recreational motor cruiser, and a loss of 3 lives, which is a really tragic part. So there were 4 people on that boat. 3 people died that night. They were heading out for a late night fish. They were expecting to catch a few fish, come home late, go to bed. 3 of them didn't make it, and the poor guy who's left, lucky to live, but with whatever trauma he's left to live with, is not very pleasant. So again, you know, a lot of this sounds really dramatic until you see the examples, and we don't really want to overhype the danger, because, you know, yachting is a very worthwhile to do, but we just want to be aware of the danger, manage the danger, and have a good time within, you know, whatever band of skill we have to remain safe. Okay. So here we go, just quickly, at midnight, 12:26 on 6th of August 2017, the 5.64 meter recreational motor cruiser and the 26 meter commercial vessel Vertrauen collided in Sussex Bay, 1.6 miles southeast of Shoreham Harbour. Okay, so I think what we'll do here, we'll go to Google Maps and just show you where it was. So we've got Shoreham Harbour is off the south coast of the UK. Shoreham by Sea. Let me just quickly check that. Yeah, Shoreham by Sea. Right. There we go. So this Shoreham by Sea, that's the entrance to the harbour here. I think that the motor cruiser was moored here, and not sure where the fishing boat came from, but probably somewhere in here too, I would guess. So anyhow, came out here, and the accident was somewhere about a mile offshore in this direction. We'll see that in a second. And if I zoom right out, so you can see we've got Portsmouth there. People know that. Isle of Wight here. Really interesting, very interesting place to sail. Lots of boats, some interesting currents, shall we say. Interesting, but not my favorite place in the world, to be honest. So we're here, right, somewhere on the south coast. So yeah, it's a pretty busy area, lots of traffic and lots of people living there with boats. So yeah, what happened was neither vessel was damaged by the impact. They didn't really hit, but James 2, the small motor cruiser, was swamped by the wash of the large fishing boat, and it sank. At the time of the accident, the 4 men on board were rod fishing for mackerel. Vertrauen had left port, was the passage to Grimsby, which is a big fishing port up on the east coast, famous place. 3 of the men on board the motor cruiser drowned. A 4th was rescued from the water 5 hours later by a passing fishing vessel, which is actually a miracle in itself, right? So the Vertrauen didn't even realize that they, you know, flooded this boat, and he was in the water 5 hours, and I assume he didn't have the signaling equipment to be picked up any faster, so probably not like a beacon on his vest, a torch, you know, VHF. I mean, I don't even know, in the old days with the Nokias, you could have a phone in a waterproof pouch and still use it. With touch phones, I don't know if that exists still. So yeah, it's a pretty severe incident. So the collision occurred because Vertrauen's lone watchkeeper did not see James 2, and once the recreational fishermen realized the danger, they didn't have time to maneuver away to clear the fishing boat. So the 3 anglers, the fishing guys, they drowned because they were not wearing life jackets or buoyancy aids and were unable to raise an alarm. So the findings: neither vessel had a proper lookout, number one. And this is always a warning when you're around fishing vessels, because by law, by regulation, they should have a watchkeeper keeping an eye out, but you know, they're working boats, they're fishing boats. So a lot of the times they run on autopilot, and people are working on board, so the focus is inside the boat, not outside the boat. So even if you got right away for a fishing boat, I would highly recommend you just stay away from them as much as possible, if you can do that, and if not, get confirmation that they've seen you, either via a radio call, or if you think you're going to collide, put up a, I think it's a white flare, is that right? White flare to get their attention. Make some noise, whatever you can, right? Just to make sure that they've seen you. Don't take any chances around fishing boats. So keep clear as much as you can would really be my advice, but you're the captain of your boat. So watchkeeping, and James 2 not being sufficiently prepared or equipped to go to sea, had inadequate freeboard, Navigation lights did not meet the standards, and basic safety equipment was either not carried or not worn. If the sea anglers had been able to raise the alarm and had been wearing life jackets or buoyancy aids, all 4 of them would almost certainly have survived, right? Because they weren't necessarily run over and knocked unconscious or anything. The boat sank from underneath them. And again, I don't really know the details, but I assume either they didn't know how to swim, or after a certain amount of time in the water, they just couldn't keep themselves afloat and drowned. So really horrific kind of stuff, you know. Yeah. So that's the boat. Big, what was it, 26-meter fishing boat. This is the small motor cruiser, 5.6 meters. It had 2 floodlights on the front, which it used for navigating out of the marina. 2 side lights. So it had port and starboard navigation lights on, but it didn't. The boat of this size should have had a 360-degree white masthead light, but it didn't have that as well. So you'll see in this report that it was just completely blind to the the fishing vessel, just couldn't see it. So the timeline, excuse me, sorry. Oh, apologies. So the timeline here, 10:28, they came out, stopped, fish, and started drifting. At 12:20, the boat, the Trawan, sort of came out of the harbour, then changed course. And it looks at this point, they're on a collision course. The skipper did try to use their mobile phone. So at 12:24, the Trawan skipper using mobile phone to send a message on social media to a friend. Okay, fine. So that's just a point in time. And then here, just before the collision, so this is at 12:25, and this at 12:26, shortly after the collision. So you can read this. I'm going to put this report into the chat, so you can have a look. And here's also a short YouTube video we're going to show. So we're not going to go through it in full, but here's the boat. And you can see here there's really hardly any freeboard. So you've got this outboard boat, and you've got this massive cutout in the transom. And apparently there is a transom board, so when the outboard is in the water, you put the transom board in to give you a bit more freeboard. That was not in. And here, I think it was something like, 30 centimeters clearance. So the wash would have just somehow come in and, flooded in the back. And I guess, with the sinkings, it gets in there. Maybe the stern sinks, the bow comes up, and then it's just uncontrolled. You just can't get the water out fast enough, and just, she was lost. So that's the boat. And again, the big Vertrauen, something you probably don't want to hit in any type of boat. Big steel. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Assuming by the name, it's probably a Dutch boat. Dutch build good steel boats. This is the path to the accident. Right, run over. That's the boat, sunk boat underwater. So you can see here when she's pulled out, there's actually really no collision damage to the boat at all. Interestingly, the outboard is not there. Don't know if it fell off or what happened, but there's really no collision damage to the boat. So it was just a pure swamping. That's the boat after it being pulled out. And the conclusion is no proper lookout. James 2 was not prepared to go to sea. So we had the lights, we had the life jackets, etc. And life jacket here, no life jackets worn by the casualties, right? So we're going to try and do a little bit of risk management on this. We're probably not going to work through all the scenarios, but we just really, the idea here at this point is to demonstrate how risk management occurs. So we did this yesterday in the stream, where I unfortunately didn't have the microphone on. So we'll put this under hazard category flood prevention, and these are the sequence of events. This boat's operating offshore, the boat's hit by a large wake or wave, boat has an outboard engine cut out in the transom and no transom board in place, the wake breaks over transom, floods boat, and boat sinks, right? That's an important point. So the unmitigated harm in this scenario is we've got a total loss of boat, right? We have 2 crew in the water. So just from the total loss of the boat on our risk assessment category, this is catastrophic, right? So this is the extreme end of the scale. And the unmitigated probability, and again, it's a judgment, is that I would probably say that it's possible to likely, because when you're out at sea, there are a lot of boats, especially in that area of the coast. So you're going to get a lot of wakes kicking up, and then sort of more or less in open waters. I would say that freeboard was probably not sufficient. So I'm going to say likely here. And this is where it gets interesting when you debate that, because I'm pretty sure that the crew of that boat and the owner of that boat had been using it for years. They'd never sunk, nobody had died. And then this came out. So that is a consideration. And from that from that analysis, looking back in time, we could say, well, maybe my probability is too high, or we could say, listen, they just got lucky. But regardless, with catastrophic, regardless of the probability, it's an unacceptable risk profile. Now, sorry, I was doing the wrong one. So I said that should be catastrophic, likely, right? So the risk controls, use of a transom board in outboard cutout, that would help. Maybe some high volume automatic bilge pumps could have helped. I don't know the volume of water, but if they had high volume pumps that kicked in automatically, maybe that could have helped somewhat. And the interesting one for a boat of that size, given it's not so big, be interesting to look at the design and see if they had flotation reserves. So watertight compartments, fiberglassed into the boat, or potentially airbags in there, which would keep it afloat. So that maybe even if it got washed, at least the boat would not have sunk, right? So that could have been a feature they could have put on the boat potentially. And the other one too, maybe here could be the cabin door kept closed when not in use. And I don't know if this contributed to the accident, but if the cockpit area was flooded, but the door was closed and the internal spaces were not flooded, would that make a difference? Theoretically, yes, I assume, as long as there's no other path for the water to get in. So, maybe that's a good operating procedure offshore for a boat of that size, right? Who knows? So here, mitigated severity, look, I said moderate. If you did all of that stuff, you're not going to sink, right? So we are, say, moderate. So maybe you're washed, maybe you lose the engine if you're unlucky. And I would say, it's still possible, but in the risk assessment, that actually still keeps us in the unacceptable level, right? So here's always the question. After mitigation, and you still have unacceptable, do you go back and do you change your analysis, or do you accept it and you continue to look for mitigations to mitigate that? So I'm not going to address that now, but the best practice is to keep looking for mitigations. So I've made this in, like, say, if you're designing a product, you'll have experts and you have data, etc., to look at, and you would debate that as a team and write down the rationale. And look, this is what this stream is for collaborative working. So if you disagree with that, put a comment, let me know the reasons why, and that's really important. Give us your rationale for it. Don't just say, oh, that's wrong. Okay, maybe wrong, but just tell us why. That's the point. So we can all learn. So here we actually haven't really really solved it particularly. Yeah, okay. Right. Now here we've got like a collision risk. Now we have all of these regulations in place, like the coal regs, SOLAS, which are the collision regulations, safety of life at sea, which actually are regulations to tell boats basically what risk controls they need to have in place. So what risk controls you need for to avoid a collision, and for safety at life at sea, what risk controls do you have to have for yeah, preserving life at sea, as the name says. So here we're going to be looking at a category of collision. So the harm in this case is, or the hazard is, you could collide. And a collision could be like a minor, you come together very gently and come apart, best case, to one big boat runs over a small boat, in the worst case. I'm sure there's lots of other scenarios. So the hazard situation I've got here is boat is navigating offshore. Fishing boat is approaching with no active watch. The boat has right of way and does not take evasive maneuvers or attempt to alert fishing boat, white flare, radio call, horn, and the boats collide. Okay, so that's the scenario. And again, with the collisions, we can do a whole bunch of scenarios, which I hope we do. And the unmitigated harm here could be total loss of boat in the worst case, and the crew in the water, or man overboard. And here, that's the right. Okay, so I think that unmitigated harm is, they're actually part of the scenario. So the boats collide, boat sinks, and crew is in water. Okay, so we're going to do that. So the unmitigated harm is the total loss of boat. We know that's a harm, but being in the water, and just to state something that's a bit silly but obvious, it could be a swim that you enjoy. You jump over the boat to swim, and there is zero harm involved, right? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about involuntarily ending up in the water. And that means that it's anything from I got a bit of a shock, for example, but just minor shock, a surprise. But you get back in the boat, everything's okay. I had my phone in the pocket, or the phone dropped to the bottom of the ocean, so it's a minor loss for that person, not very nice, but in terms of the severity scale, still pretty minor. To what we saw, where people were in the water and either succumbed to hypothermia or just couldn't keep themselves afloat and drowned. So here, we probably don't have enough information in this scenario to determine what the harm is, because there's a whole bunch of scenarios here. So when I say offshore, how far offshore are we? 100 meters offshore and the crew can just swim to the beach. 100 meters offshore on a big rocky coast where it's got vertical cliffs and they can't get out, and there's a big waves breaking on the cliff. Are they 5 miles offshore? It's a pretty difficult swim. So I would argue here that my hazardous situation is not specific enough to be able to determine the outcome. And again, I'm not going to try and solve it now, but if we'll just use the example that we've had in the accident report, and we're going to say, okay, crew is in water, boats collide, boats navigating offshore, and crew are not wearing flotation devices. Let's throw that one in too, right? Boat sinks, you cruise in water, crew suffer hypothermia and drown, as an example. And it sounds really horrific, and I apologize if it sounds like not respecting the poor people who died in the accident. That's not the goal. Any loss of life is tragic, and we're not trying to judge them, we're just trying to learn from them. Okay, so we try to keep it respectful. So total loss of boat, loss of life, right? This is about as severe as it can get. So it's catastrophic. The unmitigated probability, this is where it's really difficult. And if you've got a catastrophic outcome, it doesn't matter the probability, because if I come back to the risk assessment, in the catastrophic lane, the row, everything is unacceptable, right? So, okay, on the rare, you could probably, maybe you could argue that rare and catastrophic is acceptable, depends how rare, 1 in a million, but we've got this band of 5 bands, which could be like a 20% chance. I don't want a 20% chance, a 1 in 5 chance of something catastrophic happening. So, but again, this is where the debate, hopefully once we get this group going, we can start having that debate about risk probability. So this, hopefully you'll agree that loss of life and losing boats is completely unacceptable, right? So the risk control here, now this is a target rich environment for risk control measures, okay? So we're going to take it from we're not the fishing boat, right? We're going to be the boat. So one, maintain a vigilant watch at all times, right? That's good. Should be able to see the boat coming and be prepared to take evasive action. 2, AIS alerts. If you've got an AIS on board, set it to a proximity, so you get an alert or a radar proximity. If you've got that equipment on board, do that, so you'll get some sort of warning if you've got something within a certain proximity. So that's the sort of the alert. 3, take evasive action to avoid collision. You know, those 3 there are probably the best ones we can all do, right? Never trust a fishing boat. I once nearly got run down by a pilot boat in the middle of the English Channel, not the English Channel, like crossing the North Sea. It was pretty terrifying, actually, and it happened so fast because I was on a sailing boat just motoring at about 6 knots, and this thing was coming probably about 15, maybe 20 knots. It was a high-speed commercial vessel for the wind farm, and it was dark, and I don't know how close they were, but they just really came out of the blue. I didn't have time for the radio or anything. I just took what I thought was evasive maneuvers and didn't get hit, thank God. Maybe it wasn't close, maybe it was close, but it was terrifying nonetheless. Right. So take evasive action if you can. Yeah, and on that one too, I was watching that boat on the AIS, but I think I still was surprised at how close it seemed. I'll leave it there for now. What else we got? Maneuvers. So we've got a maneuver. If it was close, we could, for signal approaching boat, VHF, white flare, horn. Don't know how effective the air horn would be, but try it. Try everything in that situation. But as much time as you got, put something out on the VHF. Usually works. There's usually somebody listening. So that would be to avoid the collision. Now here, ensure crew are wearing life jackets on board. And just to discuss my experience, I had a pilot house sailing yacht, and I was inside at the time. It was night. I wasn't wearing a life jacket. It's a good point. I don't think I was wearing a life jacket. I would wear it when I'd be outside on deck and clip into the safety lines, these sort of things. But if I got hit by this boat, it would have been an interesting experience to get out of the wheelhouse, or who knows what would have happened if it hit. But let's assume the worst case, to get out of the wheelhouse. And if I'm wearing my sailing gear, I prefer to wear a dry suit if I can, because at least with the dry suit, you keep dry and warm underneath, and you do float. But with your sailing gear, it all gets filled with water, and your boots get filled, and all this sort of thing. Horrible, right? Horrible. So my point is, if you're at sea, do you wear a life jacket at all times? Maybe in open ocean, maybe not. Maybe in a busy area, like you're in a channel between windmills with a lot of commercial jacket. Maybe that's good practice. I don't know. Again, it's captain's decision. So here we go. We've got inshore crew wearing life jackets on board. Then we could have inshore crew carry crew, let's say the life jacket, right? Signaling devices. So when I did a expedition in Chile, the Chilean Navy required me to have a what do you call it? Those flashing. Oh, this is terrible. Strobe light. Strobe light, right? So when it gets in contact with the water, it goes off, and they're very visible from a very long distance. They're absolutely brilliant. So if you don't have a strobe light attached to all of your life jackets, go and do it. They don't cost much. And in a scenario in day or night, if you get somebody overboard, you will always be able to see them sort of, through the fog, in the night, in big swell, right? They're just absolutely brilliant, cheap and effective. Don't even think about it. Go buy it, get it, get spare batteries. Just check they work on an interim basis, okay? So strobe light is one. Personal EPIRB is another. These are a bit more expensive, but work pretty well. Use a spot tracker if you have to, right? They're waterproof, and somebody will come find you, etc. So these are all important. What am I missing here? There's probably more there. We'll get into that later. We'll do a session on personal equipment, safety equipment on board the boat. But in that case, your life jacket, you're going to stay afloat. You've got a signaling device. Somebody should be able to either see the strobe light. Strobe light will get attention. Somebody will come looking. And if you've got like a satellite signaling device, somebody will come looking for you. And then this is the other bit too. You're in the water, right? So what should you be wearing? And I think I'm missing a big one here. Ensure that there is a life raft on board for with crew capacity. So what I mean by that, if you've got carrying 4 people, make sure you've got a life raft for 4, right? That's an obvious one. And you've got me thinking now. I'll just do a quick search of the report. Yeah, lifeboat, life raft. Oh, that's very interesting. Small craft. Yeah, so this report didn't mention a life raft. It's very interesting. So even on a 5-meter boat, you can get a life raft on board that thing. And even if they had a life raft, these guys probably would have survived, right? So in the UK, I think I bought a 6-person life raft. It was about £1,500. 4-person life raft is probably going to be £700-800. Pretty good investment, right? So these guys, for the cost of £1,000, and putting the transom board they already had in place, they could potentially be alive today. Again, not to criticize, but just to take the lesson that a lot of these measures are generally not expensive, but you have to do it. That's the point. You have to do it. So show the light front board with crew capacity, then they can climb in. And what else have we got here? Is there anything else we can do? And this is a difficult one. Oops. I used to do a lot of sea kayaking, and that one's interesting because you've got these two temperatures. There's the temperature when you're out of the water, there's temperature when you're in the water. And there's some very interesting survival stories in Canada, for example, or places which have very cold water, where on a hot summer's day it could be 30 degrees and people dress for the air temperature, but they end up in this very cold water, temperature 6, 7, 8 degrees, and they get hypothermic very quick, and their hands, they lose the use of their hands very quickly, so they can't get themselves back in the boat. They get hypothermic and they end up drowning very, very, very quickly. And it's actually terrifying how quickly that occurs. So this is always a question. If you're on board a boat, do you dress for the air temperature or dress for the water temperature? Right? So I always found that a dry suit was brilliant. Even in summer, a Gore-Tex dry suit would work pretty well because it allows you to, it's breathable. You can actually layer up below. So if it's winter, you can put on thermals and fleeces and things and layer up underneath. Or if it's summer, like just wear, I used to wear merino shorts and shirt because that sort of that worked pretty well. So yes, question: do you dress for the air temperature or the water temperature? So in this case, we're talking about small boats. On bigger boats, and my boat's 18 meters, for example. And I do have survival suits on board. You know, that is probably the question. Let's throw that one in as well. So I think I might have answered my own question here. Survival suits for each crew member and crew trained in their use. So there is a rating, sea survival suit donning rating. So how fast? Yeah. So the SOLAS rule is 120 seconds. So that's 2 minutes to unpack and put it on. Safety experts apparently say 60 seconds. So in our risk list, survival suit crew member and training their use to don in 60 to 120 seconds, right? So I think I've answered my own question there. I'm going to remove this number 8 and make the 9 that, right? So in this case here, the mitigated severity, and this is also the interesting thing about the risk management and the limitations of a spreadsheet. So once we roll this out in software, we can actually segregate the severity from difference between human, vessel, and third-party property. So here, I think the human severity is now pretty low, right? So let's say moderate, like being on a sinking boat, climbing to a life raft is definitely not negligible, definitely not minor. We can call it moderate, okay. But the point being, it's not severe because there's no hospitalizations, and it's not catastrophic because there's no permanent injury, right? So we'll put that as acceptable. And then I think, in terms of loss of life, I would put it unlikely in this case, right? So let's assume we're a mile offshore of the east coast of England with your strobe light, your life raft, your signaling devices, etc. Somebody's going to come out and get you pretty damn quick. I guarantee there's probably a life Royal Lifestyle Station. There it is. Look at that, right on the point at the entrance. So those guys respond pretty quickly. I've met some of the crew. RNLI response time to launch. Yeah, so they aim to launch with 8 to 15 minutes. So this is actually when I look at this, I feel absolutely horrible for these people because they if they even without life jackets, right? If they could have signaled, it would have taken 8 to 15 minutes to launch and a mile on these boats. Don't know how fast they go or what boats they have there, but a high speed boat going 20 knots, right? So 20 knots is a mile about every 3 minutes. Theoretically, they could have been out there in 20 minutes, right? So maybe they could have survived, but it wasn't 20 minutes in the water that killed them. It was five hours in the water that killed them. So this is I feel just absolutely horrible looking at this because you've got the life station there, and this accident happened. I mean, I don't know what the here somewhere out here, right? Somewhere out here. It's literally a straight shot, and yeah, yeah, horrible, horrible. So let's have a quick look at one of these. That's not a great photo. Yeah, these sort of, I don't know the classes very well, but one of these pretty fast boat, pretty big boat. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely horrific stuff. So I think we're going to wrap up now. Look, hopefully you find this helpful. If you get this far, please give it a thumbs up, give a like, do a comment. I would really appreciate this. This is my fourth live stream. It's something I'm going to try and do multiple times a week. It'd be great to have people on the chat, have discussions, get experts onto the chat, interview people, and ultimately, ultimately um, the goal is to contribute back to the community and have this list and help with people's safety. Have you got any feedback, things you want to see, ways I can present better, whatever, just drop them in the chat. Or you can go to my website, yachtprep.com. There's a contact form there. Any feedback's good. You can abuse me as long as there's constructive feedback as well. Okay. So guys, have a good night. Thanks so much for attending. We had a couple of people pop in and out of the chat, which is really great on the third stream. And we'll see you on the next one, probably tomorrow. Good night.